I know a little bit about you just through kind of what you share, but just give me the rundown of who John is. So like you got wife, I mean, so yeah, we could just family situation. We'll just start there. So what's
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just totally normal guy. I mean,
right?
I've got a wife, Casey.
Okay.
And then I've got a son. And I live in North Alabama. And I make content online. I've got a regular day job as a software engineer, so there's that. And
we're in Alabama.
North Alabama, so like the Huntsville area.
Okay, cool. So I live in Mobile. And I lived in Birmingham for years. So where in Huntsville? Or like just are you in Huntsville?
Yeah. I'm just sort of in the Huntsville area. So yeah, cool. That's where I'm at. I did live in Mobile for about 6 months when I was younger.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I lived in. I say I lived in South Alabama, but I was only there for 6 months. Otherwise, I've spent most of my time up here in North Alabama between Decatur and Huntsville. So it's kind of generally where I've been.
Cool. And what's your son's name?
My son's name is Xander.
Okay, that's awesome. And then I don't know how you are with sharing it, private info on. But how old is he? If you're comfortable.
Oh, he's a teenager.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, I can't believe you have a teenage son, but yeah, he's a teenager, so he's going through the teenager phase right now. Nice.
That's always fun. That's super cool, man. So I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't expect you to live in North Alabama. Okay, this makes this now 10 times more interesting. Of everything I know about you, there's a lot of light bulbs going off. And so this is going to be super fun. Okay, so have you lived anywhere else than Alabama, or have you just been Alabamian all your life?
I mean, I've lived in Alabama all my life.
Okay, yeah.
I've been other places. Like I just recently got back from a vacation where we visited Italy, France, Monaco, Spain, and Portugal.
Okay. Nice. Okay. So, I mean, for someone who lives in Alabama, not only are you I had the email used. I have a lot of friends that that don't believe in God but they lack an articulation that you go in depth that you really have. Like they can kind of articulate, they have their reasons and all that, but you have gone to a level that, I just really, I have very few friends that can even some of them know about you. And then I pointed at many people to you. It's like, hey, he's a smart dude. Go listen to him. But so no, that's why I shot you an email, because I thought this would be super fun.
Yeah, it's a little weird for me, I guess, to hear that Christians are talking about me in that kind of way. So that's kind of weird.
Well, I'm not scared. Like what I don't love about just so I'm not a pastor or anything. Like I'm getting a degree in biblical literature, but that's simply, I just love. That's just kind of a passion that I've always had. I thought I was going to be a pastor my whole time I was a kid, but now I work for a media production company pretty much. And we do have a wing that's a Christian publishing wing. But other than that, I mean, I wouldn't say probably not many are, simply because the biblical literacy of Christianity is scarily low. And then therefore pastors guard and put little hedges around people. And then they go out into the real world and they're like, oh, there's actually logical reasons not to believe in God. Then their whole faith is wrecked. So I actually point people to you to be like, listen, they're smart people. They're not these idiot lunatics that videos that you post make of pastors who I definitely don't agree with make atheists or agnostics out to be. So I actually think it's more helpful to be like, hey, here's some smart people. Go listen to them. And if you agree with them, then please go ahead. So I just wanted to start out. I have mad respect for you, just all the way through. Go ahead.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I've typically, people have one of two reactions to, I guess well thought out or well reasoned explanations for why somebody doesn't believe, and it's either they become more entrenched in their faith, or they become more secure in their faith, or they start questioning more things, and eventually they fall out of the faith. But I mean, it really kind of just depends on the person, right. Because while my content might convince some people to start questioning more, which is what I hope to get people to do, other people might feel more emboldened in their faith after listening to some of my arguments. So, I mean, it works out however it works out.
Right. So how was that journey for you? So you grew up in Alabama. So did you grow up going to church in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah. I mean, I started out Catholic. My family's Catholic. My dad, his whole family's still Catholic, and he's still Catholic. And but after my parents divorced, we eventually left the Catholic Church and kind of bounced around different denominations. My mom wasn't all that religious for a good while, and then she kind of jumped back into it. I began to get back into like religion when I was, I guess, maybe a teenager, because all of my friends, they were very religious and they were going to like church and youth services and all this other stuff. So since my friends were doing it, I was like, well, I should probably do it too, kind of thing. And so I got back into religion. And so I kind of had like a back and forth kind of relationship with religion there for a while. I would be really into it. And then I would, I'd do other things and I'd, I guess, fall out of it, or at least not be as strictly adherent to it. And then I'd feel compelled to get more strictly adherent to it. So it just kind of went back and forth like that. But I went to private Catholic school until fourth grade. And then I left there, went to public school. But I grew up in a very, I guess, a very religious household. Although the idea of God and Christianity in general was just kind of taken as an assumed fact. Like it was just kind of like a de facto thing. And so we didn't really put a lot of emphasis on it at the time, just because like there was no real concern about non-belief or anything like that. So, growing up, we were religious, but, we weren't so hardcore religious. And I mean, there were a lot of times where I look back on myself and, I found myself being a little, I guess, embarrassed by, like some of the things I experienced in religion. And I felt, while I was Christian, I was pretty unsure of a few like worship practices that I experienced in different places. Like I went to this one church where everybody was just very excited, and I guess I was just never that excited like about church or anything like that. And I don't know if maybe that's because I grew up Catholic, and Catholic is very mechanical, right? Because, you go to mass and there's a very specific set of rituals that you got to do during mass. And it's just all very one right after another. So like whenever I was in mass, I could identify when we had like 10 minutes left before we were able to get out. And so like, I was happy to be at that point. I'm like, yes, we're kneeling for the 5th time. That means we're about to leave. And so I was never all that excited like about religious services. So, I mean, maybe that had some kind of play into it, but I was never the kind of person that would go around proselytizing my faith or anything like that, or really talking about like why people should believe in God or Jesus or why they should adhere to my particular denomination. I never really felt all that connected to any one denomination. in insofar as much as I felt connected to religion in the first place. So I mean, a lot of people might want to point at that and be like, well, you were never really a Christian, or you were never really religious or something like that. But I mean, I feel like that's, trying to state knowledge that you don't necessarily have. Like I knew what I believed, and I vividly remember several instances where it's like, no, there's no way that, I was doing that and I didn't really believe in God, kind of thing, where I didn't really believe in the things that I believed in. So, people oftentimes try to play the card of, well, you weren't really a Christian, or you weren't a true believer or something like that. But I mean, I think a lot of people get lost in what does it mean to be a true believer, to truly be a Christian or something like that. Some people really focus way too hard on that, because I feel like as long as you believe in God and you believe in Jesus as the one way to get into heaven, and other theological aspects around that, I mean, I think you're just as Christian as anybody else. And so, it just really bugs me now when people try to use like somebody's adherence level as a way to say, well, you didn't truly believe, kind of thing. That always seems kind of shady and scummy to me.
No, definitely. How I'd normally try to tell people is, at the end of the day, you are not the judge. There's only one judgment talked about in the entire Bible, and that is when someone stands before God. Therefore, it's not your role to tell someone if they were really a believer or not. So no, that's totally, that's crappy. That's crappy. You still have to deal with that, because no, you're definitely right. That's totally, that's definitely a douchebag move. But again, it's because they don't know how else to defend it. I mean, just kind of like, you present very scary facts for someone who has zero, like, churches don't talk about the things you talk about. Like, it is scary how many churches just will. So this is when I started asking about apologetics. I was told, well, you're never going to talk someone into heaven unless they'll be able to be talked out of heaven. So that's why we don't talk about these facts. And I was like, well, that's kind of sketch. So, and that's kind of how I started my journey. But so no, I've definitely been more of a skeptic than, which I'm definitely coming at it more from a skeptic perspective than the normal Christian. Because I mean, that was in 7th grade when I was told that. It was just, so I'm 24 now. So it's definitely been
and I mean, in my experience, in my life experience, people in more academic settings are, if they're not scared of the answer, or they're not scared of the topic or something like that, they're very eager to like sit down and explain things to you, and are very adverse to preventing people from asking questions. And I even continue this today of, if there's ever something that somebody's like, well, you just don't need to ask those questions, or you don't need to think about those things, that just makes me want to know why they are saying that even more. Like, why don't you want me to ask this question? Like, what is behind this question that I need to know? And you're like, oh, don't look back there, kind of thing. And so I feel like the tactic of thought stopping, which is kind of what we're talking about here, getting people to stop thinking about something. I think that's a common tactic that some people use to prevent people from thinking too critically about a topic. And it's one of the things that I really hate, because you've got thought stopping, like there's thought stopping tactics even in the atheist community as well as in the religious community. And I think that if anybody ever encounters a time when they, they're asking questions or they want to know more about something, and the person is just basically gets to a point where they're just like, they give you some kind of canned line that makes you stop thinking about it. Like, oh, well, It's because God says so, and that's why it's fine. And like, you're not supposed to ask any more questions. Like, that's a thought stopping, way to respond to somebody. And I feel like if you ever encounter that, like it gives you, that should be a clue for you to find out why they don't want to talk about it. And, some of the harder verses in the Bible that I still have problems with today, and is one of the reasons why, I'm not so easily convinced of the Christian position, is stuff like Numbers 31, where God commands entire people groups to be wiped out, and then young girls taken as sexual slaves. And I recently told somebody about that passage, and they didn't have a good answer for me about it. It's like, yeah, that's a tough one to really chew on there. I don't have a good answer for that. And I feel like putting it in the perspective of, well, this right here, I have a lot of problems with squaring with the rest of Christian theology that's been taught to me. And that's the reason why I don't believe. And I feel like a lot of people are stopped by some apologists out there that get them to stop thinking about it by just giving them these canned responses that are geared to do exactly that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's because, again, kind of the biblical literacy thing, kind of why I started doing what I do, just the podcast and everything, is because there's scary amounts of thought stopping all throughout Christianity. And it's like, we have good, this thing would have lasted 2,000 years if we didn't have good responses. You're just too lazy to go find them. And yes, there is still holes. Like, I can look at you and be like, yes, there are some of your arguments that I am still chewing on. There are some of Richard Carrier's arguments I'm chewing on. But at the end of the day, it's like, from the Christian perspective, if you can't look at those arguments and be like, okay, I can chew on that, then your faith level is small. Like, if you can't rest in that tension, I honestly more encourage you to take a break. Like, just see what your life goes. If you kind of give in and try not to be a Christian for a while. And if there's a difference and you kind of feel like, okay, there's a hole here, or maybe there's something different, then find where the difference is. And if God was the difference, then there's that. But if you can't rest with there's a hole here, here, and here, and there's parts where you're just going to have to say, I don't know, then you're going to live with that trouble for the rest of your life. So you need to choose now if you're okay with that, or if that's going to be so messing up in your everyday life. You just need to go ahead and just find a different life. Not find a different life. There's faith somewhere, which not faith somewhere. You can always go find an answer. So I don't try to use a thought stopper, but it's more of like, if this troubles you so much, there's a reason. Go find why this troubles you. And if it's because that's going to be the thing that leads you to say, hey, I don't believe God is real, then go pursue that. So it's more of trying to egg them on more so. Does that make sense?
Yeah. A lot of people think that my channel and, my brand and everything like that is geared towards getting people to leave their faith. But I've always emphasized that the only thing that I ever want to do is to get people to critically consider what they believe and why they believe it. And, as long as you've done that and not allowed somebody else to tell you what to think, I think that, regardless of what side you come out on, that's the only thing that I want out of everything that I do, is because I spent 25 years of my life, not carefully considering what I believed and why I believed it. And I just sort of accepted what people told me about, different things like, God, religion, and a lot of other things. And coming from the South, and I don't know if you've gotten this, but I've had relatives that are is, problematic, I would say. Like, they're very problematic viewpoints, very problematic things that I was taught as a child that I've had to come to terms with and really correct my own perspective on things. And I think that it's growing up in a household where I was just told to, like, okay, well, this is what you should believe. And, this is the only thing that you should believe about this one thing. And just sort of listening to that and accepting it and not critically thinking about it is, kind of what I did for 25 years. And the one thing that I want to do with the Godless Engineer brand is to get people to critically think about, what they believe and why they believe it. And as long as I can do that for people, I'm perfectly happy, regardless of whether or not they're Christian or atheist. And I think that a lot of people see me explaining why I don't believe, or me explaining what holes I see in religious arguments. They see that as me wanting to take other people's religion away from them, or me wanting to convince people away from their religion. But in reality, I'm just hoping to explain to people why I'm no longer a believer, why I no longer believe in this particular religion or any religion at all. And There are people that want to see it as me wanting to take people's religion away. You okay, hon? You're okay. It's all right. They see me as wanting to take their religion away, but I feel like that's a bit of a defense mechanism, because I feel like a lot of people, with the advent of social media as well as the internet and everything like that, they they're inundated with all of this stuff, and just coming across the very notion that people don't believe, or that people are criticizing different religious arguments, or criticizing their God in general. I feel like they take it as a very personal attack, when it's really not meant to be. It's really just meant to be a criticism of the religion, which is not a personal attack on anybody in particular. It's not even required. Like, it's not demanding that anybody leave their faith or anything like that. It's just like, hey, look, here is a bad thing, and I can't reconcile this bad thing, and this is a problem. Is it a problem for you? Kind of thing. It's about conversation, and a lot of people have problems separating the personal from the just very generic religious criticism.
Right. Yeah. No. And then I've even seen that with as I post mainly like biblically encouraging content. Just giving people a little hope, with a little bit of apologetic stuff. I kind of dabbled in a little bit, and then just kind of some thoughts I had while reading a lot of Richard Carrier stuff. I don't only comment that, hey, I kind of was reading this, and I'm kind of responding to this viewpoint, but I don't like say I don't I hate reaction videos. So just like like I read this, and here's why he's going to, like, just, it's stupid when people, but just kind of musing on those thoughts. That's why I respected you so much, is just because, like, in the comments, I would just get pounded. Just like, hey, like I was, I got a little, it was like, just like personal attacks. And I'm like, yo, this isn't going to help any, like, I just wanted to do this as a convo. And then don't get me wrong, I've had a lot of great conversations in the comment section, but like, why I just really wanted to chat with you and why you just stuck out to me is just because how, like, it's easy to see that you're just like, hey, I'm not trying to do anything for you. I'm just saying, here's a fact. Here's how I'm seeing it. Here's the research I'm looking at. You can do with this what you desire. So that was just super respectable. That's why you kind of stuck out of, just because on both sides, it's just like, there's a lot of, it gets personal. And when you do personal attacks, that's not going to help anyone. No matter if you're Christian condemning people to hell, or you're an atheist saying that they worship a magic sky bunny and are like, just either way, it's not helpful.
I agree. And I mean, I think that just goes to show that, both sides of the conversation can kind of, take the low road, as it were. And typically in conversations, I I try to focus on like having the conversation rather than, insulting a person. There are a few occasions on a few particular topics with people that I've already conversed with that I'm already at that point where, I'm kind of a bit more insulting about it, I guess. But I feel like that's more on a personal level because I've already had interactions with them, and there's, for one reason or another, the conversation just devolved into this other person being like a condescending douchebag. And, it's kind of like it's a burnt bridge for me. But typically if I'm having a conversation with somebody and it's like, fresh, contact or whatever, I don't see the point in immediately coming out with very vitriolic sort of abrasive tone and content and interaction. That's, if you're wanting somebody to listen to you and have a meaningful conversation and to get them to carefully consider, the arguments that they have or your arguments against their arguments, throwing vinegar at them is just not going to help. And so that's why I try not to get to that point. And if I ever find myself where I'm getting to that point, I just know that that's the point where I need to cut off like contact, because at that point there's not going to be more productive conversation. You just, you've got to put it down, basically the whole conversation.
Right. Yeah. So I just love how you do that. So I just wanted to kind of muse on that for a second. So kind of getting back to a little bit of your story. What were the things that began the shift from you kind of never really, so what I'm hearing, you never really faded from, you went from kind of very devoted to like, I still believe in God, but I'm just not living as devout as maybe I was before. What shifted you from that to, okay, maybe this whole thing isn't what I've been told. Maybe this isn't real. So kind of where did the shift start happening for you and why?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I can pinpoint kind of the night that, I started to, critically consider what I actually believed, as far as religion goes. And, so the way that you described me going back and forth is pretty accurate, because like I would be very devout and then I would not be so devout. But I always, whenever I was in that kind of phase, I'd always have this massive guilt, like, oh, I should be going to church, or I should be doing these things. Like, these are things that I should be doing. And I would feel that way. And so I'd go back and forth. And it was during one of those times where I was, I believed in God and everything. And I felt pretty secure in my faith, but, I was teetering, I was in that kind of low phase of low, devotion, I guess, to the religion. And I was more focused on, the social aspects of being part of, like, in this particular instance, it was a church softball team. I was playing on the church softball team, and, I was sitting there and I was just, thinking about what I believed in everything. And I had a friend, and he said, well, and this is going to sound, bad, but my friend goes, well, if you don't believe in the Bible from cover to cover as literal history, then you're not a real Christian. And, now looking back on it now, I recognize that as a no true Scotsman fallacy, because I mean, there are plenty of different interpretations of the Bible as to, whether or not you think it's literal history or metaphorical or something like that. Like, there's a lot of different interpretations of it. It's not just like this one thing. But at the time I didn't really know about like that kind of like how fallacious that was or anything like that. And so like, as soon as he said that, my friend, I immediately knew that I was no longer a Christian. or at least I didn't consider myself a Christian because I didn't believe in the Bible as literal history from cover to cover. There was a lot of problems like that I had with Noah's Ark and the creation account that's in Genesis and all that. So if, like, he's telling me, oh, well, you have to believe in this, is 100% literal, then you're not a Christian. What is going on with my tablet over here? It needs to stop. Sorry, it was bugging the crap out of me.
No, you're totally good, bro.
So anyways, I immediately knew that I wasn't Christian anymore, or at least I thought I wasn't a Christian anymore. So I had to figure out what I actually believed. And so what I did then was I started on this journey where I was looking at like debates on the topic and reading arguments and counter arguments and all that. But for me, really, it was the debates, because you could juxtapose both arguments right next to each other as presented by the speakers. And I mean, it really kind of depends on what debates you watch. So there are some debates out there that are just trash fire or dumpster fires is what it's called. But at the time there weren't really like a lot of debates that were happening, especially in the amateur online community. There was really only professional debates between like philosophers and religious apologists and all that. And so I watched a few of those, and juxtaposing the atheist or the secular arguments against the religious arguments, I found myself leaning more towards the secular or atheist arguments, because those seemed to make more sense to me and made more sense to my very analytically minded brain. And the religious side of it didn't really sway me at all. Like it to me, it came off as people that were really banking on just assuming certain things rather than proving or logically validating or having logically sound arguments for their positions. And so, at the end of it, I just sort of came to the realization that, I don't believe in God anymore. And I have to say that was probably one of the harder things that I've had to do in this entire journey. Was admit to myself that I didn't believe, because my entire life I had been, told that, well, God exists and that's the way that you should be. And it was just kind of the de facto sort of position. And it was like one of those things that sort of defined you as a good person, or at least that's how it had been presented to me. And, I always wanted to be a good person, to people. And so like, that's one of the things that factored into my struggle with how devoted I was to religion. Like, it's like, oh, I want to be a good person, so I should go to church more. And, so there was that kind of internal struggle when I was still a Christian. But, admitting to myself that I was no longer a believer in any kind of God, that was the hardest hurdle for me to get over. And once I got over that hurdle, it would take a lot for me to shift back. And so it definitely wasn't a light switch kind of moment. Like, it's not like one thing, totally flipped me to atheism. It was more like one thing started me on a path to really investigate what I believed and why I believed it. And at the end of that particular journey, I had to say to myself, well, I don't believe anymore. And so that's pretty much how I came to my present position, which is ever evolving. Like, I'm really glad that I'm not stagnant in my point of view. Not right. To say that like Christians are stagnant necessarily. I think that there are some denominations and some people out there that are stagnant in their faiths, but right. For which is kind of like where I was. Like I feel like I was pretty stagnant in my faith, but my worldview is ever evolving. Like, I'm ever considering things, and I'm always reevaluating like why I believe something or why I think something, and I always double check myself and all that kind of stuff, which is vastly different from how I was when I was a believer on this particular topic. So right. Yeah, I'm glad that I moved out of that. And I'm always, I'm always evaluating, what I believe.
Right. So cool. So so you mentioned specifically the creation account in Noah's Ark. So let's start with the creation account, just because I just love listening to stuff like this. So just what about the creation account? Just was like, okay, this isn't, just kind of why is the debates that we're dealing with the creation account in Genesis 1-2 that made you question it all?
Well, I mean, it's really the, I guess it's really how divorced both accounts are from reality and how reality works. You could start at the very beginning with Genesis 1, and, being that God said, and let there be light. That's, if you want to say that represents how the universe came into being, that is a severe oversimplification of what we currently understand about the beginning of our universe. For one thing, it assumes that our universe is the only universe, which we don't know that, and it would be difficult to prove that our universe is the only universe, just as it's difficult to prove that there are definitely other universes out there. It's just kind of one of those things where we're like, well, all we know is that our universe started at this point. Now, we have a pretty good explanation through quantum tunneling and quantum scalar fields for how our universe could have inflated naturally. And but here's the kicker: after our universe inflated, there was a period of about 300,000 years of darkness. Like, it was so hot and dense that not even light could travel through the universe. And like atoms didn't form, like the quarks were just flying around places. And so, it wasn't until much, much later on that the first light started to traverse in the universe. And that was after atoms started to form. And so, considering all of that and all the science that's gone into that, to reduce that down to, and God said, let there be light, I feel like that while people that wrote the Pentateuch and the Torah and all that, they could have easily surmised, well, this universe had a beginning, right? But I feel like that if God was really inspiring this text, maybe he would have been a little bit more verbose about how the universe actually started, instead of just saying, oh, let there be light. Also, with the whole let there be light thing, it insinuates that there was some kind of consciousness or sentience that had to create light in the first place. And I feel like that there's enough of a natural explanation to reason your way into the universe just naturally inflating, and natural physical laws taking over after that, which eventually coalesced into this current moment. And so I feel like there's a lot of assumptions that go on in like Genesis 1. And that's just in the first line of Genesis right there. And then if you go on to like how things were populated on the earth, how things were created on the earth, we know that, the way that the Bible describes things coming into existence on the earth is not how it actually happened. It's in stark contrast to what the physical empirical evidence says. So, I mean, it's totally radical to me for anybody to think that Genesis 1 and 2, which I consider to be two completely different accounts of creation, as being any kind of literal thing. And I mean, I didn't mean to try to go into any like deep analysis, like biblical analysis of it, but like just starting from the very beginning, I end up having a lot of problems with what the Bible says versus what the empirical evidence says. And it's really hard for me to get past this empirical evidence that contradicts what the Bible says about stuff. And so that's all throughout like the creation accounts.
Okay. Nice. Okay. Yeah. So let's. Oh, that was really good. That was really concise. So I'm just going to give you what I'm thinking about, which question, because I have a couple, but just while I'm thinking about it. So kind of really what made me dive into more of this is, so my parents got divorced my sophomore year of high school. So around, so I'd have been 16 at that point. So 8 years ago now. My mom ended up marrying and she ended up started dating this atheist, and he moved in with us. And this is the smartest man I know, but also what really started messing me up, one of the nicest human beings on the planet. And up until this point, you know, I think a lot of the division that happens in this is that we start, and in anything, we put the other side of this argument as an object that are a force that is trying to make us change and ruin our lives. So when I started looking at this man, and I'm like, okay, this dude is nice, and he's nice to my mom, and he's nice to me, and he sits here and watches me play GTA and asks me questions. Like this is totally messing me up right now. So just getting to talk with him is really what truly started making me think critically, and because yeah, he writes literary fiction. Like he's just super smart dude and super great dude. So I think so just kind of want to give that little background piece that started complicating my life a little bit, that started making me chase some of these, just chase the more deep, that sort of, other than, because after 7th grade I was like, okay, yeah, and I looked, and I went to I picked up a couple of Josh McDowell's books, started looking at debates on YouTube. And yes, I knew there was tension, but still there wasn't anything that was like, okay, I'm so swayed that I'm going to totally ditch this. So yeah, I was still just open though. Just like I'm still open. So I would listen to them. We'd talk. So yeah, so just want to throw that out there. So you really were concise with that. So now I'm really interested to see what you have to say about Noah's Ark. I didn't want to rush in the Noah. So I just was throwing that out while I was thinking through. But that was really, you put a nice little bow on it. I feel like that was super concise. If we have time, I might jump back into that. But I want to hear about good old Noah and his ark.
Right.
First.
I mean, I've got a lot of problems with the whole Noah's Ark thing, because for one thing, there's no empirical evidence that there was ever a worldwide flood. And also, in order to accept the whole Noah's Ark thing, you would have to accept that, I mean, I guess you could believe that in an old earth, but it seems like you need to believe in a young earth. And there's a lot of problems that I have with the story, like being able to fit all the animals on the ark. I'm not exactly sure how Noah would have been able to do that. And then subsequent arguments that I've heard from like Ken Ham and other creationists about how the animals that were on the ark, they were not the animals that we have today, but they were some kind of proto versions that eventually produced all of the animals in this, what they call an orchard of life. But that would have resulted in like these animals producing new stable species at not inconsistent, but an inconceivable rate. And right. It would have required that. So there's not enough water like on the earth in the first place to like flood the earth. Of course, the counter to that is that there weren't any mountains, or like Mount Everest didn't exist prior to the flood, and that Mount Everest and other mountain ranges and like that sprung up when God flooded the earth. So there's the whole water thing. And there's this idea that there was water in the crust of the earth, and that the water from the crust of the earth shot up out of fissures, in the earth, and that's how the plate tectonics and everything like that, the plates on the earth were formed. But the problem with that is that the physics just doesn't work out for water spouting out like that. For one thing, you need something in the earth to put pressure, like in order to spurt the water out from the crust, for one. For two, in order to move the water that fast, it would by the time the water reached the surface of the earth, it would literally be water vapor in the form, steam, and that would cause like a flash cooking of the surface of the earth, for one. For two, it would have come out so fast that it would have, the water vapor would have ejected off of the earth, blowing the atmosphere off the earth, for one. But that's just thinking, well, maybe there was enough water under the crust in order to flood the entire earth. But that's really kind of a moot point, considering that there's not enough water even in the crust of the earth to explain a global flood. And then, of course, you've got the moral aspects of it, because, you've got, God, who's supposedly all loving and all this other stuff, and he chooses to flood the entire world. Of course, the Christian counter to that is that, well, mankind had given themselves over to sin and they were all evil and all this other stuff. And so God just decided to, start over again. And I can't imagine that the people at the time were doing such horrible things that, God had to raise the entire earth and just start over with this one family group, because of all of the things that happened after, after the formation of Christianity, all the conquistadors that totally ravaged, the Americas, and all of the wars that were fought in God's name, and all of the different violence that was done in God's name. I can barely conceive of humans being more horrible in the past than they were at those periods of time. And that's not to say that it couldn't have happened, but I feel like whatever they were doing was more than likely not any worse than at any other point in our history. And that's before you even get to the fact of it was Noah and his family that repopulated the entire earth. And that's, disproved by just population genetics and how our genetics work in the first place. And because there's this thing called the 5,500 rule. And basically, in order for a population to survive and grow, you need a population of 50 individuals to stave off the effects of inbreeding, and then 500 individuals to stave off the negative effects of genetic drift. And so you need a substantial population of organisms in order for that group of organisms to survive, just based on genetics alone. And the fact that God only left 8 people to repopulate the earth, that just seems a bit sus to me. Primarily because at that point in time, this was after the fall. So assuming creationists typically will say, well, Adam and Eve were genetically perfect. And I'm like, that sounds quite Aryan of you. But they say that, it's they were genetically perfect. And so basically our genetics work completely differently at that point in time, and that there were no bad mutations that happened or anything like that. That doesn't exactly explain Noah, because that was far after, Adam and Eve supposedly existed, that our genetics were already corrupted. So they have to specially plead about how 8 individuals could have populated the entire world. But just the fact that these 8 individuals would have had to reproduce with each other, and then they would have had to reproduce with the offspring that they generated, and then their offspring would have to produce from their own offspring. Like it seems rather complicated and not all that sustainable the way that the Bible has it. And not only that, but the diversity of life that we have on this earth is not explained by Noah's Ark landing on Mount Ararat. Noah's Ark landing on Mount Ararat. Like, how did all the animals go back to their respective environments? Like, how did the kangaroos know to kangaroo themselves, from Mount Ararat to Australia? Like, how did they do all those things? Now on, geology and ancient geography and all that, we can explain how these different organisms got to the different places on the earth, through various means, either through continent splitting and plate tectonics, and all the way to rafting that would have been occurring during various ice ages and all that. Like, there's very reasonable explanations on the scientific side with empirical evidence to back it up, versus what I feel is a more supernatural explanation of, God wanted it this way, and that's just how it happened. And so I can't square up between the empirical evidence that we have and what the Bible says about it. And, the Bible doesn't really give specifics about, like, well, how did Noah fit all of the animals on the ark? How did all the animals get back to their respective environments? Why there's just so many questions that are surrounding Noah's Ark there. And so I feel like I covered a good bit of it. Probably not all of my issues with it, but those are kind of just some of the things.
Right. No, and I definitely feel you on a lot of those. So no, those are all fair pressure points. Feel like there is definitely feels like more reasonable argument for just not the less no Noah's Ark, and so no, those are all reasonable. And to say they're not is ludicrous, which a lot of Christians sadly do. So that is fun because, but but I want to respect your time. We got, so just super quick. And then, so the whole house of cards with Christianity is Christ. So what in the aspect of, and then for one, just so kind of, I know where you stand. I got to hear a conversation with Richard Carrier. So are you that Jesus did not exist at all, or do you lean more towards the side of he was a person, he just didn't get up from that grave, and he's not God? Just so I know what question to ask here.
Right. No, I definitely don't believe that Jesus was a historical person. I think that he was mythical.
Okay, cool. So then my last question then is my only is just, I just want to see your response here, because I feel like the discrediting of these three different sources is just what I haven't been able to find a great answer on. So a tradition that would be appalled at the thought of Christianity perverting it would be the Jewish rabbis that just kind of get in the talk of them. I've had a couple combos with them. One of them let me record it. The others didn't feel comfortable with me recording the convos. But kind of digging into this of could there have ever been any crossover? One of them got very offended, and that's where the conversation ended. And then just even thinking the thought. So just a tradition that is so extremely strict throughout history. When we go look at the Mishnah, I'm pretty sure, and I know for sure it's in the Babylonian Talmud, but it would have been recorded in the Mishnah, which would have been 2nd century, and then compiled into the Talmud. which would have been 4th, 5th century. Babylonian would have been 5th century, I'm pretty sure, into the Talmud. So discrediting that. And then Josephus, I can actually see that argument. So we'll leave that since we only got. And then the totally different source of Tacitus. And so since we only had a couple minutes, let's just focus on the Talmud. Why do you think that source is corrupt? Pretty much of a Jewish rabbi tradition that is so extremely strict in record keeping. Like, or where are their faults? I might not be seeing the faults either. So what faults do you see with that recording of Jesus's death in the Mishnah, where it talks about Yeshu, and then all of the details lining up, or most of the details lining up with the trial of Jesus, which is how most Christians point to, okay, this was Jesus. And then if you haven't kind of seen that argument, I can send you something after of lining up with Mark.
The lining up with Mark. I guess I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, sorry.
The only Jesus I know of in the Talmud was a Jesus under King Janaeus, who was ruling at the very beginning of the 1st century BCE. And the exact specifics about this Jesus's death are in stark contrast to the one that supposedly started Christianity. He was killed for a different reason than Jesus. Like Jesus was, at least as according to the Gospels, Jesus was killed for claiming to be God, or for something along those lines is what the Gospels communicate. But the Jesus under King Janaeus was killed for like performing magic tricks and all this other stuff. Another thing is that he was tried and killed by the Jewish Sanhedrin, or a Jewish court of law, and then his disciples directly after him were also subsequently killed, and he was also killed in a completely different city. So I mean, there's a number of reasons to not consider this Jesus to be the same Jesus that's talked about in Christianity. So I guess I don't know what you mean by the Jesus in the Talmud lining up with the Gospel of Mark.
There's only one Yeshu that would have been in the Talmud. So that kind of gives me the answer to my question of how is a different Jesus, or the source was corrupt. I want to respect your time, so I don't want to sit around and have to go with that. But I'll send you just kind of the. Okay, cool. Yeah, I just didn't want to.
So I mean, I don't argue, and I don't think that Dr. Carrier argues that the Babylonian Talmud is corrupt. On this particular topic. I don't know about topics outside of this one. Because, there's actually evidence in the Babylonian Talmud of a very early tradition of interpreting Isaiah 52 and 53, the suffering servant, as the Messiah, indicating that the Jews already had this concept of a suffering and dying Messiah, and which kind of sets the scene for, what happens in the 1st century as far as like Paul and the other apostles and their theology about Jesus and why they depicted Jesus as a suffering and dying Messiah.
Right. Yeah, and it was I think it was just more of a side note. So not that it necessarily corrupt, but they were since Jewish tradition, and Christianity was a Jewish sect for the first, really until Constantine officially said, hey, you're a real religion now. And then so really did for the first 3 years, but it was more of a side note of there could have been crossover, so it might not have been the main point of his argument, but he did admit so it was more of a side note. So I don't want to hold you up, but I'll just kind of send that over just so you can take a look, and then you might be able to shoot back, but just so you have it, and then we might, if we connect again, we can kind of chat more on the Jesus side of things. But I just kind of want to. But no, it's 6:30, so I told you an hour. So we can shut down. Those are the main things. Just kind of getting intro, just talking. Yeah. So thank you, dude, for real. This was fun, and I hope we can relink up and we can actually get more into the apologetic-y side of things.
Oh yeah, totally.
Have that combo.
I've enjoyed the conversation. So, anytime you want to have me back on to have, a deeper discussion about any of these topics, I'm definitely down for it.